The following episode touches on subjects such as trauma, mental health and suicide that some people may find triggering. Please take a sec and consider who's listening, and that includes you. And remember, if you need to chat things through, please call Lifeline on 131114 or visit beyondblue.org.au. Rescued is a podcast of conversations with rescuers and those who've been rescued. It's about the lessons we learn about ourselves, the places we go and why, without judgment or shame, to help us have better adventures, manage risk and deal with the unexpected. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Paul Luckin. Part 1 is pretty key to a lot of the things spoken about in this episode. So if you haven't heard that yet, I thoroughly recommend popping out and listening to that first, which you'll find at episode 14. So how can we change this, Paul? I mean, this is the conundrum I play with all the time, is how can we better get these messages across to people? Is it, should we be looking at that kind of public campaign to try and make or help people think about the risks and think about steps they should take before they head out for a bushwalk?
I think we should, absolutely. And I think that podcasts like this of yours are tremendously valuable in that respect. But we're talking to the converted. If they're listening to your podcast, it's because they're thinking about these things. How do we reach the other people? Well, everybody else in the world knows it's not going to happen to them. How do you get that through to them? Well, it's kind of like, how do you convince people that they should wear a seatbelt? They're not going to believe you unless and until they see the results of not wearing a seatbelt. So if we want people to understand, yes, it can happen to you when you go for your wonderful adventure, your bushwalk, your whatever it is. If they are not aware of the outcome and of the results of people who don't take care, I honestly don't know how we get the message across to them. But when somebody is found and they are injured or dead, if they're injured, the media really want to play up the fact that they're injured and, somebody's been injured, and you see the wonderful photographs, the film of the rescue helicopter. You don't hear that person now spends 3 months in hospital and never walks properly again, or that he's got a head injury from damaging his head. That's not newsworthy. If people knew that, they might stop and think. If there was actually detailed coverage of the fact that this person died unnecessarily, and if they had done the following, they might have survived, that might get through, but you can't do that. And you can't do that because they've got a grieving family at home. And the family are now thinking, well, they might have survived, and they might tell their friends that. But you can't tell the public this was an unnecessary death. This was a lack of planning, a lack of preparation. And one has to be careful. You've got to be careful what you say, and I do too. At least one inquest where I've given evidence, if the person had made one phone call beforehand just to say, I'm at so-and-so and I'm about to do this, the search and rescue operation, when they didn't check in a few hours later, would have been launched immediately, going very specifically to the area where that person was, and they might have been found alive. In the absence of that call in to say, yeah, I've got to point A, I'm heading off to point B, I'll be there in 4 or 5 hours' time, I'll give you a call when I get there, or activating the emergency locator beacon of whatever type it is. In the absence of that, they don't survive. So how do we get that message out to the rest of the world? I do not know. Bad news doesn't sell, and because there's a grieving family there, you can't actually make that information public.
I always think about the families, the families who are at that forward command post, and seeing their faces, seeing them not having the skills to go out themselves and feeling helpless, but to show them that there is this whole network of people, and we are just here. We are standing alongside you. We are doing everything we can, connected to each other, to make this the best it can be.
And that's something that people very rarely understand, that it is a huge thing. The public conception of search and rescue is very often what they see on TV, a row of people, often in orange overalls, walking through the grass. That's not a search and rescue operation. That's usually an evidence search. They're looking for specific bits of stuff. And people, by and large, aren't aware that search and rescue is, firstly, an incredibly complex operation. It's very highly scientific. It's not, let's go and look in that. But, a lot of it is mathematically based, particularly when it comes to working out search areas. So there's a thing called the probability of area. Police calculate very carefully the likelihood of a missing person being in a particular area, and that's called the probability of area. Then they calculate what's called the probability of detection. Given the assets that we have, be it helicopters, drones, people on foot, motorcycles, boats, marine vessels of any type, what is the probability using those assets that if the missing person is in that area, we will find them? And then after the probability of area, the probability of detecting them if they are in that area, what is the probability that they are alive at the given time? And that's where they consult me. Then the question is also, if we can find them and if we can find them alive, what is the probability of bringing them home alive? And that's the ultimate game in search and rescue. So it's an incredibly complex mathematical exercise as well as a physical and practical exercise. I have always encouraged the police to do what is now very, very common, and that is to have members of the public at the forward command post. One of the reasons is that they can see that it's an incredibly complex and diverse operation and can see just what a huge number of assets are being involved. It's not two policemen standing at the post thinking, well, let's go for a walk through that path and have a look. It'll be 20 or 30 police people of different types occupied in a search. And it may well be 30, 40, 50, 100 SES personnel. It may very well be another dozen people in different aircraft, and it may well be 50, 60, 100 soldiers involved as well in the search. Search and rescue is always dangerous. It's always complex. It's always well organized. And one of the great benefits that we have found in the last umpteen years I've been doing this is for the people at the forward command post running the search to say to the family, this is where we are, this is what we're doing, this is the area of the map that we've searched, these are the assets that we've got, and this is the latest update in the medical advice that we have. That is tremendously helpful and comforting to the family. And it means that when they get to the end, if it's not successful in bringing home somebody alive, they have the comfort of knowing that every single possible thing has been done. Every avenue that could be thought of has been thought of. You used to some years ago, not so much recently, see that you get today 5, 6, 7 of a search, and the search is now scaled down or changes from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. In other words, we're no longer looking for a person alive because we know that's not possible anymore. No, we don't think it's possible. We know it's not possible anymore. You would hear that the family have mortgaged their house, taken everything they own, hired a pilot in a light aircraft to fly up and down the coast for 2 or 3 days. They would not do that if they understood that the police have had half a dozen aircraft up. They have had a grid search very, very carefully planned. If it's in the water, they have dropped a dummy into the water and watched where that dummy goes. They have dumped a whole lot of theoretical balls on a computer screen into the water, looked at the drift patterns, the wind and the waves, and on computer modelling, they have looked at the drift patterns, they've looked at where that missing person or missing vessel could possibly be. And as time progresses, that search area increases, and that has been extensively searched. They don't know that. They don't realise that that's the case. So they spend every penny they have and a lot more that they don't have getting somebody up in an aircraft to conduct a small-scale search that is a fraction of what has already been done.
Massive thanks for the support from the team at Paddy Pallin, who since 1930 have been leaders in travel and outdoor adventure. In fact, did you know that Paddy himself, a member of the Sydney Bushwalkers Club, was a volunteer in the original search and rescue arm of the Federation of Bushwalking Clubs in New South Wales? Nice one, Paddy. A question that I get asked quite a lot, and it's a question that maybe you've been asked before. In fact, I'm sure you probably have. When police say, the search is going to be wrapping up after so many X number of days, how do they decide when to start wrapping things up? And what does that look like? And how do they reach those kind of decisions?
I'm talking out of turn now because I'm trying to talk about decisions other people make. So I'm not the expert in that.
Understand.
what they do is they look at the information that they have and look at the time frame, the possible scenarios in which the missing person could survive, and how long we think it's reasonable for them to survive in that. And they will often come back to me 2 or 3 or 4 times and say, can we have an update on this? And almost invariably, we reach the point at which I say, I do not think there is any reasonable prospect of the person being alive at this stage. They will go on searching. And they've often said to me, we'll search for 50% longer than you say is reasonable. Now, again, that 50% is a rubbery number. That is a determination the police will make on anything. I don't ever say to them, stop now. I will say to them, I cannot at this stage argue that scaling down a search is unreasonable. And again, that comes down to not just an understanding of the physiology and of what might have happened to them. It comes down to a very deep personal understanding of being on the ground conducting a search and understanding how difficult it is in different environments and why it's difficult, and how likely it is that you may be able to find the person while they're alive. So it's a sort of a whole of search and rescue experience, not this is what I think as a doctor. Down to, again, teamwork. It comes down to be part of understanding what it's like to be in the team conducting it. And it's very much teamwork. And I think and again, everyone else will have perhaps a slightly different view of this, but I think that the most important and the most valuable thing the family members can do during the search and rescue operation is to be completely open with the information they give police. Tell them everything you know. Now, frequently, people will not tell the police everything they know for 2 reasons. They will try and tell them what is comfortable for everybody to know and not tell them what's uncomfortable. They won't tell them that they are, for example, taking recreational drugs. They won't tell them, they may not tell them that. They may not tell them that there is, in fact, a history of attempted self-harm because, it doesn't reflect well on the missing person. Those things like that, the drugs that they've been taking, whether they've had arguments with people, whether they've had a major fight, whether they've recently lost their job, whether they're facing arrest, all of those things do have a major influence on how you are able to plan and conduct a search and rescue operation, because it gives you insight into what they may or may not do. It's that insight that is terribly, terribly important, because without that insight, you're operating blind. So for the family, just say, which is more important, telling the police everything that they need to know to help find the missing person alive, or keeping our secrets within the family? And the answer is tell them. And the other thing that people sometimes do is they will try and tell police what they think the police need to be told to make them go on searching, or to search particularly to search where the family think the missing person might be. They will deliberately skew the information to make the search and rescue organization as a whole do what they think they should be doing. Please accept that the police and the broader team conducting a search and rescue operation do know more about search and rescue than you personally do. They know more about it than I do. They are the people who are best equipped to plan and run the operation. But the best chance of finding your missing relative or family member or loved one alive is to give them absolutely open, truthful information. Now, the police are not going to reveal that information. It's not going to be on the news tonight. Well, Joe Bloggs is a known drug addict and he's got mental health issues. It's not going to become public knowledge. But it does give the police the best opportunity. And for Indigenous people, occasionally they don't want to share information with police because it's secret tribal business, or because it goes into tribal trust areas or sacred areas. But again, that handicaps the search and rescue organization in terms of finding people.
Just on that, if you were holding back information because you feel that, maybe it would bias the searchers, if they thought poorly perhaps of your loved one who we're helping to try and find, not only does that information that you may share with the police not get shared to the public, it quite often doesn't get shared to the other people searching, to the searchers. Certainly not at a volunteer level, not at a boots on the ground level. That kind of information is kept very tightly within a very small group of people. And certainly when it came, if you're thinking of, a search with 20, 50, 100 SES and RFS volunteers, maybe members of national parks, military, all that kind of thing, nobody knows that stuff.
Now, look, thank you for pointing that out. That's a very important point. That information will be between the family who give it to the police officer concerned, which is the search and rescue manager coordinator, possibly one or two senior police who are working with him, and me, if they share it with me.
I'm curious, when you talk about some of those good phone calls you like to get, where you've been proven wrong, can you think of any stories where people have surprised you by surviving well outside estimates and statistical data?
There are two immediately that come to mind, and these resulted in the other kind of happy phone call that I get, which is not you didn't expect him to be alive, but he is, but we found him alive within what was expected. And those are the equally happy phone calls. We had a chap quite some years ago who got lost on Morton Island, and he was a Brazilian visiting, and he came to a conference on the Gold Coast. He caught a ferry across to Morton Island just to do a day walk, and didn't catch the ferry back again. The next morning, the people at the conference said, he hasn't pitched up at the conference. They phoned the hotel, and the hotel said, well, he left yesterday. He's gone. We believe he's gone to Morton Island. The police immediately spoke to the ferry, who said, yes, he got off the ferry, but he didn't catch the ferry back again. So at plus 1 day, a search was started on Morton Island. And it was a very extensive ground search. Very, very early in the piece, the police contacted his brother in Brazil and obtained a massive information from him. He said that the missing man was a very resilient individual. He was a very tough guy. He was a very intelligent guy. He was very thinking. In his youth, he'd been a guide in the Amazon jungle. He'd been lost twice, and he'd survived. And we said, okay, what would he do in the following circumstances? And we had long discussions. And in the end, we were of the opinion that if he got lost, he would know exactly what to do. He would walk up. The part of Morton Island where he was lost is very, very steep gullies, up and down, very, very dense vegetation. It has a beach on the west side from which you can see the lights of the mainland Queensland, and it has a road that transects it going from west to east. So if he hit the road, he would know where he was. If he hit the coast, he would know where he was. If he went up, he'd be able to see the lights at night. We were confident he'd go up. We were quite confident that he would use vegetation to best advantage to make some shelter. I was quite confident that if it rained, he would take leaves, he would use the leaves to funnel water into his mouth to drink, or he would go down to a hollow, he'd find a wet hollow, and he would dig until he was able to find some sort of water. He would probably use a sock to filter the water through so that he got the sand out, he had fairly clear water. And he would do everything that he could think of, everything we could think of to survive. So by day 2 or 3 or day 4, there had been no rain, there was no groundwater, there had now been no rain for a couple of days. We were getting to the stage where I was saying, well, at this stage, survival till the end of tomorrow or the day after, depending which stage we were having the conversation, is possible. Beyond that, survival prospects are very poor. Then, in the middle of the search, we had quite heavy rain one night. I said, great. If he did everything that we expect, if he collected water, if he found water in a hollow, if he took shelter, he could survive. And if he's had a big drink or a couple of big drinks, in terms of fluid intake, the survival clock starts again. So we extended the survival period. Now we got to day sort of 7, 8, 9, and there was a lot of pressure on police to stop. It was a difficult operation. We had a lot of soldiers from the army base at Inogra. We had a lot of SES personnel. We had a lot of police personnel in very hot, very humid, very adverse conditions, searching in dense vegetation. And at that stage, there was a lot of pressure. And I said, no, it is possible for him to be alive because we'd had another little bit of rain. And again, I extended the time frame for survival. the two police officers in charge of the search dug their heels in, and they said, the medical advice we have is that survival is possible. We will go on searching. And a lot of pressure on everybody to scale down and stop the search. And got to the point which I said, okay, I think that by the end of tomorrow, and this was day 10, we will have reached the practical limit of survival. I do not see a prospect of survival beyond the end of day on day 10. At, I think, 11:30 on the morning of day 10, he was found curled up on the sand alive, barely alive, but alive. He was winched out by helicopter, taken to hospital, and we interviewed him a few days later. We had a detailed debrief with him. What did you do? He said, I walked up the sand dunes so that I could see the lights. I knew where the mainland was, but I walked down the dunes and became totally disorientated, working my way through the bush. I knew that the beach was on the side of the mainland, but I couldn't find the beach because I lost direction. I waited until it rained. I collected water. There were some palms and some plants that had big leaves. I used those to collect water. I collected water in my jumper and then squeezed out the water to drink that, and I was able to have enough water for me to pass urine a number of times. That's great because that tells me he was fairly well hydrated. At night, he sheltered in a cool spot and protected himself. By day, he tried to find his way out, but again, he was just lost in the sand dunes and the thick bush, and he was obviously just walking around and around and around, could not find his way out. He heard people calling him, but he had read that there were pigs on Morton Island that attack people, and he thought that the voices were pigs.
Oh, no.
He didn't respond. Because of the canopy, he could not see the aircraft overhead, although he could hear helicopters and he knew that people were searching for him. So he tried to make himself visible, but he couldn't find a clear enough patch. Eventually, he did find a clear patch and he stayed there. He found a patch where there was no canopy and he stayed in the middle of the patch. He said, I found a clear patch. First one I found, and he said, if they're going to see me, it's because I'm in this clear patch. And he waited in the clear patch. And that's how we found him. So he did everything that we would expect. Other remarkable one was a prospector who went walkabout in West Australia. And he went out for an hour, diabetic, carried with him some food so that if his blood sugar dropped, he could have something to eat, and carried with him one bottle of water. Went out at 4:00 in the afternoon, said he'd be back at 5, didn't come back. So instead of waiting until the next day or the next day, that's the other important thing for families to do. When somebody's missing, don't wait. If they're missing, phone again, don't phone a friend, phone police. Phone a friend and see if he's there, yes, okay. But as soon as you are sure that somebody's missing, phone immediately. Don't wait till the next day or late the next day, which happens more often than I can tell you. So he was due back at 5, didn't come back at 5. At 6:00, they phoned police and said, our 72-year-old is missing. He had mild dementia, but didn't sound as though it was bad enough. So a search and rescue operation was launched immediately, and the West Australian TRG, Tactical Response Group, trackers, went out to look for him, and they are the most incredible team, and I hope some of them hear this and relay just how good I think they are. Now, we reasoned that because of his lack of knowledge of the terrain and the fact that it was fairly flat, leading into a salt pan and a degree of dementia, he would walk backwards and forwards and backtrack a little bit. He would not be walking in an absolutely straight line. Once he got out of the salt pan, he might be able to see, gain a sense of direction and walk towards something. But he was more likely than not to walk haphazardly. Day 2 came and day 3 came, and I had anticipated that he would survive until the end of the day on Tuesday. Then on Monday, in the middle of the day, I got a phone call from police to say the TRG had found his tracks, and they thought that the tracks were about 24 hours old. He was walking uniformly, as in his footprints were evenly spaced, and they were even distance apart from left to right, and there was no heel indent. In other words, he was walking. He was not staggering. He was walking purposefully, so he was still fairly competent. So I increased the prospect of survival by 24 hours because I did not think that if he was like that he would be dead when I thought he would. I extended the time frame for survival until the end of the following day. The trackers kept on following him. And at about midday, on the day on which I thought he would die, the police trackers found him. And in fact, what happened was they extended the search. They sent out a team to set up a radio relay station. The guys set up the radio relay station at the top of a hill, walked down the hill, and there he was lying immobile, as I'd expected, underneath some basic shelter, a little tree, as we'd expected, and near death, as we'd expected. As they very often do, a medic very close by. The TRG got to him. They put up a drip, gave him 1.5 liters of fluid intravenously. He was able to spit the flies out of his mouth and close his mouth, and his breathing and his pulse improved. After 3 liters of intravenous fluid, he was able to open his eyes, and he was still too unstable to move, to evacuate by helicopter, and there are lots of reasons for that. So eventually they were able to walk him very slowly a distance to a vehicle that they could get in and take him out.
Wow.
So he was just within the expected survival time. And we have become fairly good at estimating survival times fairly accurately because of the feedback police give me, because they phone and say, we found him at such and such a time. This was his condition. This was the distance from point last seen, which is also vital in terms of being able to estimate next time how far somebody might go. He was between 7 and 8 kilometers from point last seen. But that demonstrates that the police take advice, they seek further advice, they come back with updates. And for example, in that case, the updated information was absolutely crucial to extending my estimate of the time frame for survival and of finding him alive within that survival window. And that's one of the magic finds that we've had. Never give up.
Do you have a personal story about an incident or time during an outdoor trip when something didn't quite go to plan? Maybe you got lost, injured, let down by some gear, or something else. Look, honestly, it can happen to any of us at any time, regardless of how experienced we are. And it's by sharing these stories that we can all learn and help avoid them in the future. If that's you, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email to rescued@lotsofreshair.com. That's LOTSA freshair.com. I'm curious about demographics of missing people and of people, and we've talked already about solo people going out by themselves as being a really critical issue and very much a common thread across cases that you've been dealing with. Can you speak at all about the demographics generally of the people that come across your pathway that you may get a call about?
When it comes to land searches, one large group is elderly, demented people with dementia of varying degrees who go for a walk in the morning and don't come back. That is a very large group. Then there is a second group of people who are more likely to be in the sort of 20 to 50 area who leave home with suicidal intent. And then the question for us is whether it's, firstly, whether we do believe they have suicidal intent, then whether it's a completed suicide or maybe an incomplete suicide, and then you try and plan what they would do in those. In terms of people who've gone, for example, for a bushwalk and got lost, they are predominantly male. They're predominantly in the sort of 20 to 50 age group. And I don't often get calls about women who are missing by themselves, other than in possible suicide cases. In terms of people who are missing while they are rock fishing, a very high proportion of those are Asian males, again, usually in the sort of 20 to 50 age group. And I don't know whether going rock fishing is more popular in the Asian immigrant community. And in fact, quite a lot of them are visitors who come to visit Asian relatives here. but they have a high missing and death rate, particularly in rock fishing. That comes back to a public education. How you get those messages across is very, very difficult. Take, for example, Mount Augustus in South Australia. It's an area where quite a lot of people have died because they go out on a walk. They go out on very hot, dry rock in high temperatures and die usually on the way back of hypothermia. And we've had a considerable number of people have died in that particular area, as we've had a lot of rock fishermen die at salmon holes in Albany in West Australia. So how do you stop them doing it? You have as much public education as you can, and you resort to actually putting a sign at the beginning of the path to places like this saying, this is a dangerous area. And you then actually resort to the lengths of putting a board on which you say, 12th of April, 1996, 28-year-old male died here on this walk. And then you go all the way up to 2nd of January 2024, 18-year-old female died on this walk. Does that have an effect? Doesn't seem to. Because, they obviously weren't prepared, they obviously weren't fit, they obviously weren't me, I can do this. Well, people die because they don't think it can happen to them, and it does happen to them. I really do not know how you get that message across.
Is there anything else that you, from your extensive experience, both clinically and in rescue yourself, search and rescue yourself, that you think is going to be a great learning and a great lesson for us listening?
Oh, look, three of 1,000 thoughts come to mind. If something happens to you and you do become lost or injured, the first thing to do is stop. Stop, wait for the feeling of dismay, of panic, of whatever else to just stop. And that's one of the major survival lessons in an aircraft crash. Get out of the aircraft and stop. Stop, take stock of what you've got, and plan where you're going to go from there. The second area is with people with dementia. It would be phenomenal if every person with dementia had some kind of tracking device on them. Now, be it an Apple AirTag that you put on a bracelet around their wrist, or one of the many devices that give people's locations. And if they've got an Apple AirTag, as a simple example, you can use Find My Phone, and you can know exactly where they are. It might be that you put it in their clothing, or put it on a wristband, or as a pretty thing around the neck, or whatever. But devices like that would help with people with dementia. Now, that's important because we look for so many people with dementia who wander away. And finding them alive is a matter of doing so quickly, because very often they're not able to understand that they're lost, not able to understand that water is a key determinant of their survival. Very often, if they see water, they won't drink it. If they see a tap, they won't go to the tap and have water. So one of the burning questions that we ask the family is, if they see water, will they drink it? If they see a tap, will they go and access the tap? If they see a person, will they go and ask them for help? Possibly not, because in dementia they don't realize it. So some tracking device on people with dementia. And another very common cause for search and rescue operations at the moment is people who leave home with suicidal intent. So if the family know that somebody is distressed, if they know that they have mental health issues, please, as much as you can, keep track of their mental status and their status. Quite often people will say, but, last week everything was different. Suddenly they were bright, they were cheerful, they were happy, they stopped worrying about so-and-so, and we thought, fantastic, they're on top of this. That's not always a good sign, because that quite often means that they're happy because they've made the plan. They know what they're going to do. They're not worried about it anymore. They've got their decision made. They know what they're going to do. They know where they're going to. So if you see that, keep an even more careful eye on them. And if they're missing, tell authorities as soon as you possibly can. So tell authorities, but start at the same time phoning around. Phone the friends, phone where they used to work, phone the shops where they go to the shops where they used to go to, but let people know that your loved one is missing. Don't delay, because the more you delay, the wider the search area, the more time has elapsed, the more possibility is that bad things have happened. So act early. And that act early is one of the great things if anybody is missing. And be proactive. plan what you're going to do if your demented partner or loved one is suddenly gone for 10 hours. Hopefully you notice long before 10. It's very common for people to phone and say, we put them to bed at 7 o'clock last night. They were not there at 8 o'clock this morning. So, if you put them to bed at 7 o'clock, an elderly demented person, before you go to bed at 9 or 10, just open the bedroom door, check they're still there. Because then, if they're not, we know about it at 10 o'clock at night, not 8 o'clock the next morning. If you get up at 6 o'clock, just open the door a crack and check that they're still there. Don't wait till they don't come out at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, because every hour is so important. Every single hour in a search and rescue is important. At one international symposium on search and rescue, I was given a badge that said, search and rescue is always an emergency. And when people phone me and say, look, I'm sorry to phone you now, we don't know much yet about, or I wondered about phoning, I say, no, search and rescue is always an emergency. Start as soon as you possibly can. So the earlier we call, the better.
The earlier we call, the better. Well, Paul, thank you so much. There is so much gold, so much treasure in all that we've been discussing and in all that you've shared. And thank you so much for your willingness to speak, because as you said, you tend to hide in the shadows a little bit. And the only people who know about these types of roles are usually the people who are involved in it. But I think that the lessons that you've learnt and that you can share are incredibly valuable and will be valuable to a whole lot of people who are hearing this. And if not to them, because as you said, we could be preaching to the converted, to their loved ones and to the people that they care about as they share these stories as well.
Well, Cara, thank you for your tolerance, and thank you above all for spreading the love, spreading the message, getting it out there, and telling people what we do and how we do it, and hopefully improving everybody's chances of survival and of enjoying this wonderful world that God gave us to the max.
If you've enjoyed this powerful story, or one of the many others from my super generous guests, you can help more people connect and hear these valuable lessons simply by leaving a 5-star review. And why not even click that little bitty share button on your podcast app and help your outdoorsy mates find it too. The Rescued podcast is produced on the unceded lands of the Gundungurra people of the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge their enduring connection to and care for country. Special thanks to our sponsors, Paddy Palin. This has been a Lots of Fresh Air production.